Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Priyanka Neela Krishnan Show with me, Priyanka Neela Krishnan. This is Enterprise Security Series, episode 45, the 4 days to tell the truth. And this episode matters for anyone whose name or whose board's name is now attached to cyber risk in a public filing. My standing note first, this is my independent commentary, my own views, not tied to any employer, product, or vendor, and nothing here is legal advice. Today, we are talking about how governance stopped being a binder on a shelf and became something you have to do on a deadline in public. Regulators changed the game. A materiality clock now runs in business days. Board oversight is a disclosure requirement, and the questions you must answer during an incident assume a capability most programs quietly lack. Over the next 15 minutes, I'll walk you through what actually changed and why your audit history does not prepare you for it, and how the continuous data governance this whole arc has argued for is now not just smart but required. Let us get into it. There was a time when governance meant having the right policies on file ready for the auditor. That era is ending. Regulators no longer want to know if you have a policy, they want to know what happened, how bad it was, and they want to know fast, sometimes within 4 business days, on the public record, with your board's name attached. This episode is about the shift from documenting controls to disclosing outcomes and why it changes who is accountable. I am Priyanka Neela Krishnan. I am an author of couple of security books, namely Autonomous Data Security and Jailbreaking LLMs. All right, let's talk about the clock. Something fundamental changed in how cybersecurity is regulated. A lot of programs have not caught up for it. For years, compliance was about process. Do you have a policy? Can you show the auditor a document? Is the control implemented on paper? You passed by proving controls existed. And it all happened privately in binders on your schedule. That era is closing. The new question regulators ask is not to do you have a policy, it is what happened, how material was it, and when did you know about it? Compliance moved from process to outcome, from private documentation to public disclosure, and from your timeline to a legal deadline. This is a profound shift because a program optimized to pass an audit is not the same as a program built to detect, assess, and disclose a real incident within days. If your governance is still a set of binders, the clock is going to catch you unprepared. Let me explain why the shift from process to outcome is more disruptive than it sounds. A program built to pass an audit optimizes for evidence that controls exist. A program built to meet a disclosure clock optimizes for the ability to detect, assess, and truthfully report a real event in days. Those are different muscles, and being excellent at the first tells you almost nothing about the second. Plenty of organizations with spotless audit histories have discovered mid incident that they cannot actually determine within days what data was affected or how far the breach reached. The binder was complete, the capability was absent. That gap is exactly what the new era of regulation exposes. And it exposes it at the worst possible moment in public on a deadline. Here are the two eras side by side. On the left, governance as a noun, the binder on the shelf, policies, control matrices, audit evidence, reviewed once a year and produced on request. It measure it basically measures its measure of the success it measures was simply whether the document even existed and does it look complete. On the right is governance as a verb. The clock on the wall in this era, governance is a live capability. Can you detect an incident, determine whether it is material, and disclose it within a legally mandated window? Its measure of success is how fast and how truthfully can you act when something real happens. The organization in trouble are the ones that built for the left column and now face the right one. A beautiful policy binder does not help you when you have 4 business days to make a materiality determination and file it publicly. The skill being tested changed. Make sure the thing you built matches it. Let me make the right hand column more vivid because the difference is operational and not philosophical. Governance as a verb means that when something real happens, you can assemble the right people, determine materiality, and disclose within a legally mandated window truthfully and defensibly. That requires cross functional muscle memory a binder cannot provide. Consider the AI governance gap as an example of how far behind most programs are. IBM found that among organizations that do have AI governance policies, only 34% perform regular audits for unsanctioned AI. So even the ones with a policy mostly are not checking whether it is followed. That is governance as a noun, a document that exists but does not act. The clock era demands the verb, and most programs are still conjugated in the wrong tense. Here is the number that defines the new era: 4 business days. Under the US Securities and Exchange Commission's cybersecurity disclosure rules, public companies must publicly disclose a material cybersecurity incident within 4 business days of determining that it is material. Read the mechanics once again carefully because they are the trap. That is, according to US Securities and Exchange Commission cybersecurity disclosure rules, public companies must publicly disclose a material cybersecurity incident within 4 business days of determining that it is material, right? So the clock does not start when you discover the incident. It starts when you determine it is material. And the rules are explicit that you cannot sit on an incident to avoid making that determination. So the materiality assessment itself must happen without unreasonable delay. So in practice, you have a compressed timeline to pull together legal, finance, security, and executive leadership. Decide whether a reasonable investor would care, and if the answer is yes, then file it publicly. If the first time those people are in a room together is after the incident, you're already behind. This is not a documentation exercise, it is a rehearsed cross functional response under a deadline. Let me walk the mechanics of 4 business days because the trap is in the details. The clock does not start when you discover the incident. That's number one. It starts when you determine it is material, and the rules explicitly forbid dragging your feet on that determination to delay the clock. The assessment itself must happen without unreasonable delay. So, in practice, you have a compressed window to convene legal, finance, security, and executive leadership and decide whether a reasonable investor would consider the incident important, and if so, you have to file it publicly. And you have to make sure that this type of meeting happens before an incident happens, so that it's that is a rehearsal that's done. This is a rehearsed capability, or it is a failure. That is a very, very important distinction that you need to be focusing on, because you're already behind by the time the incident is out. And then if you're building the process during the emergency it was supposed to handle, then just imagine how the things are going to go. So therefore, it has to be a rehearsed capability. Otherwise, there is some very much big possibility that it is a failure. And this is not a single rule you can treat as an exception. It is a pattern. Under the US CIRCIA framework, as it takes effect, critical infrastructure organizations face reporting of covered incidents within 72 hours. You remember the incident that happened during the flight booking? We were not able to get the flight. Suddenly things are happening. What's going on? Yes. So within 72 hours and ransomware payments within 24. Across the Atlantic, the EU's DORA imposes operational resilience requirements on the financial sector, and the EU AI Act adds a whole new layer of obligations specifically for AI systems with some prohibited practices already enforceable. And here is the one that changes accountability. The SEC now requires companies to disclose in their annual filings how their board oversees cybersecurity risk. So even in your annual filings, SEC requires to disclose on how your board oversees the cybersecurity risk. Cyber governance is now the board's documented public responsibility. It is no longer something that lives entirely with the CISO. The obligation and the accountability moved up to the top of the house, and it is on the public record. Let me stress that this is a pattern and not one rule you can treat as an exception. Under CIRCIA, as its final rule takes effect, critical infrastructure faces 72-hour incident reporting and 24-hour ransomware payment reporting. So, in Europe, the DORA imposes the operational resilience requirements on the financial sector. It's only in the Europe area. And AI Act layers on obligation specific to AI systems, some already enforceable. And the piece that changes accountability most, the SEC now requires the companies that to disclose it publicly, right? That is that part. So, it's moved from CISO to top of the board, top of the leadership, that is to your board, and it is now available publicly. Therefore, since the accountability has changed, so you need to be prepared long before an incident so that it is documented, recorded, disclosed appropriately. So here is the reframe that ties this episode to the whole series. You cannot disclose in 4 days what you cannot see in real time. Every one of these regulations assumes a capability that most binder era programs simply do not have. To determine materiality quickly, you have to know what data was affected, who and what could reach it, and how far the incident spread. And you have to know it in hours, but not even weeks. You have to know it in hours. That is not a policy. This is continuous visibility into your data and your access, which is exactly what this entire series has been building toward. Continuous visibility towards your data and access. Governance is no longer the documentation of your controls, it is the operating capability to understand in real time what is happening to your data. The regulators, whether they meant to or not, have made continuous data governance a legal necessity. The companies that govern their data because it was smart are now the ones who can meet the clock because they have to. Let me tie this reframe to everything we have built in this series because it is the payoff. You cannot disclose in 4 days what you cannot see in real time. Every one of these regulations silently assumes a capability that binder era programs lack. To determine materiality fast, you must know what data was affected, who and what could reach it, and how far the incident spread in hours. And this has to be a continuous visibility program into your both data and access, which is exactly what we've been arguing throughout some of these series. The companies that basically govern their data because were really really smart because now they have both data governance and identities access governance as well in the same place, so it's easy for them to do the right thing when the time arises. And there are like three moves that you can take, and these matter before the clock even starts because you cannot build them during an incident. So, therefore, you need to be prepared. Number one, pre build the materiality huddle. Legal, finance, security, and executive leadership need a defined, rehearsed process for assessing materiality within hours. Decide who decides and how before the incident, not in the panic of one. Second, instrument for the questions you will be asked. Every disclosure regime comes down to the same three questions: what data was affected, whose data was it, and how far did the incident reach? If you cannot answer those in real time, you cannot meet a 4 day clock. And the only thing that lets you answer them is having governed your data and access in advance. And third, bring the board in now. Their oversight of cyber risk is a disclosed public obligation. Brief them on the incident and disclosure process before anything happens so that when the filing asks how the board oversees cyber risk, the answer is true and you can show it. On pre building the materiality huddle, the specific thing to decide in advance is who decides, right? So that's something very, very important. And who decides and how. That these both things are very, very important. In materiality is basically a judgment call that blends legal, financial, and technical inputs, and you cannot improvise that judgment under a countdown. On instrumenting for the questions, notice they are always the same three. So there you are, you this should be the same thing like what data, whose data, how far, and you can only answer them if you govern the data before the incident. And on bringing the board in now, do it before anything happens. That's very, very critical so that when your annual filing describes how the board oversees cyber risk, the description is true and you can demonstrate it rather than being aspirational. Regulators and plaintiffs, attorneys, both read those filings very closely. And the gap between what you claimed and what you practiced is exactly where the liability lies: claim versus practice. So, you need to make sure that what you claimed and what you practiced are aligned. And now, coming to the close, governance used to be something you had a binder, a policy, and a control you could point to. Now it is something you do on a deadline in public with your board's name attached. The regulators have made real what this series has argued from the start, that securing the perimeter was never the job. Understanding and governing your data continuously is the job. And now it is the law. In the final episode of this arc, we look at the force that is about to test every idea we have covered because it does not fish, it does not wait, and it can act at machine speed with real access to your data. The AI agent. What happens when the thing holding the keys is not a person at all? I am Priyanka Neela Krishnan, and thank you very much for watching. So, the close for this one marks a real turning point. Governance used to be something you had, a binder you could point to. Now, it is something you do on a deadline in public with your board's name attached. Understanding and governing your data continuously is very important, and now it's become the law. Move it off the shelf and into your operations before an incident forces the move on your worst day. Make sure if your governance that your governance is not in the shelf and the clock is going to find it. This is my source slide. You can take a look at it. This is where some of the references for this presentation came from. All right, with this, this is the episode 45. The line to carry is governance used to be something you had, a binder you could point to. Now it is something you do on a deadline in public with your board's name attached. You cannot disclose in 4 days what you cannot see in real time, so the continuous data governance this arc is argued for is now not just smart, it is required. If this was useful, please do subscribe and share it with your legal and compliance partners because this one is a team sport. Tell me in the comments whether your materiality process has ever been rehearsed or whether it only exists on paper. I am Priyanka Neela Krishnan, and this has been my independent commentary on enterprise data security, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay secure, make sure you're always happy and contented. Bye, everybody.